This is Masters of Podcasting. My name's Melissa.
I'm Conley.
And today we're going to talk about episode 9, Involuntary.
Rare.
Yes, true, with the cat claws out. The theme of this episode really stood out as being the worst thing that you've ever done. What's the worst thing that you've ever done, Conley?
Should I reveal this on an internet podcast?
I don't know. The federal government might be listening in. Maybe we shouldn't go into details.
The NSA already knows too much about me.
You know, mine involves lasers in the moon, a moon base, a secret moon base that the federal government definitely knows about.
I have an elaborate 4-step plan, and the last step is profit.
Good for you. Step 3, question marks.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So we go through, and I really feel like each character, maybe not Jenny, but kind of everybody goes through a moment where they have a worst thing you've ever done, and some of them realize it, and some of them don't quite realize it. So, like with Bill, his worst thing he's ever done is probably, at this point in the series, he would say, you know, giving Jenny the money and betraying her at the end of the episode. And for Libby, I think it's, well, we can get into this, but I think it's ambiguous what she thinks the worst thing she's ever done is. And other people state theirs outright, and other characters, it's a little, not the worst possible thing that can be done by a human being, but the emotional quality of it is probably so ramped up, like Vivian's situation in the synagogue is the worst thing she's ever done, maybe more along the lines of the worst thing that's ever happened to her.
Well, and I feel like, too, you know, it's different, the worst thing I ever did that I feel bad about and harbor guilt for versus the worst thing I ever did that I feel great about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like in Ethan's case.
Yeah. Or in Libby's.
Yeah. It all depends on whether or not you're willing to take on the guilt for it, I guess.
Well, should we go ahead and dive on in?
Sure. So we start out with Bill and Jenny in the lab, and they are very comfortable with each other. They're just putting their clothes back on like it's been a fun little evening. Yeah,
it was, the open flirtation obviously was funny to me, but especially Bill's whine of protest. Shorter nails, please. You know.
I did like the way he caught his breath when he was talking about, well, I guess I'd consider this a performance evaluation. Like, he caught himself up like, oh my God.
Yeah, that was great.
That was great. But really, this is really too bad. This is the last glimpse we get in season 1 of Bill and Jenny doing it together.
Well, and the last glimpse we have of them being, I would say, almost completely comfortable with each other. Because from this point on, it just gets super awkward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, comfortable with each other in the lab. I'd say they're comfortable with each other up until Essie shows up and she scuttles everything, as she is wont to do. She upsets the apple cart. That is her function in life.
I would say there's even tension, though, before that. Like, when they're trying to get the film developed with Jane and the guy behind the counter tries to get all smarmy with Jenny, there's still that undercurrent of tension and weirdness. So it's
I saw that as an extension of their flirting over dinner.
Well, I mean, certainly the part of the machine was flirting, but not all of it seemed to be flirtatious, obviously, and I think that some of the not knowing where the boundaries are contributed to that.
I see what you mean. So we have this, apart from I guess the two kind of tie together. They're sort of opposite sides of the same issue. We have what's the worst thing you've ever done, and we have performance evaluations and all this anxiety about the performance evaluations, and they kind of tie into each other.
I just love Jane's petty bribery. You know, she comes in, if I give you hot coffee and a bear claw, you will write me a great review.
I did like the expression on her face when she turned around and looked at Jenny, like she was like, I got this. This is a lock. This is in the house right now.
Slam dunk.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, Jenny tries to take she tries to take the path of least resistance, I guess, to try to coax Bill into writing her performance evaluation, you know.
And then it just goes to hell around the middle of the episode.
It's really too bad. Yeah, okay, so Essie shows up with dinner.
Well, and even before that, I loved how, you know, Bill, in all his pettiness, decided he wanted to try to shock his mother by telling her about the sex study. And it only serves to make her show up with dinner in the middle of the night.
And his angry expression, he just closes his eyes and just apparently wishes that he could wish his mother and everyone around him dead for a little while.
Well, and I loved the way that it happened, too, because you've got everybody sort of chatting amiably in the lab, and Lester babbling about film techniques to Jane, and, Jenny writing stuff down and Bill writing stuff down, and then you hear in the distance, "Hello, Billy!" And you just see the flash of fear on Bill's face, like, God, no.
Please, please, please. So actually, yeah, you're right. He does try to shock his mother, and notice that he has to take a bolt of alcohol before he can get to that point where he feels brave enough to lash out at her. Even when he's trying to be shocking, he it's like he can't really face her and face some form of reality between them. Anything beyond superficiality, completely sober. Like he can't do it.
Well, and I think that's why the conversations between them are so marked in this episode, because it's the first time that both of them are actively talking about things that happened and not just either dancing around it, or obviously there are those elements of avoidance and dismissal and trying to twist it into something that it wasn't, but they actually do start to acknowledge some of the real shit that lies underneath this river of delusion. And so I think that's why, it's just so raw.
Yeah, and she tries so hard. She tries to seem so engaged and so interested, but she reveals herself to be a very perceptive person. She picks up easily on the flirting and the rapport that they have very quickly.
Well, and obviously she picks up on that, but then she also gets a sense, I think, of Bill's true devotion and where his heart really lies, because obviously, she's the one spending evenings with Libby watching poor Perry Mason bribes people on television, and then here's Bill spending all his time in this lab with this, I won't say interim family, but essentially that's what it is.
Yeah, a kind of filler office family in a way.
Yeah, and there's more sort of geniality there and at that makeshift table than there is between him and Libby and Essie, so it's obviously she spots the differences there and can kind of pick up that if he doesn't change, something is going to go badly wrong.
Yeah. And her showing up and her being involved was a real life detail from the biography. She frequently made her house kind of a pit stop, or she's kind of their den mother. The staff and Bill and Ginny would go over by themselves, and her apartment was just open to them, and she would have food in the fridge, and they'd fill it up and just have late night dinners, and the staff would come over to her house. She was very involved in the study, but the biography is careful to note that Bill's relationship with his mother was still, even when she was around and being involved, it was still kind of fraught.
Yeah, maybe she's comfortable enough to talk to them about the study and feed them and be the fairy godmother none of them knew that they wanted, but obviously it's not going to magically heal.
Right, exactly.
20 years or more of abuse, so.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ginny's reaction during the dinner.
I think at first she was, obviously Bill was just stone-faced and embarrassed, so I think Ginny was playing off of that and just trying to coax out Essie and be amused throughout the event.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that backfires, because not only does she draw attention to herself, she sort of awfully reveals Bill's true feelings for her in a way, at least indirectly, through that evaluation. Well,
and it wasn't, I got it through that, but it was also the call and response they did of him describing, basically him telling everyone, the different reactions that she had during participation in the study, and she's sitting there interpreting them and translating them into layman's language, and she's kind of embarrassed and kind of flattered and sort of turned on in a way that they're having this secret conversation in front of everyone, and presumably no one would know what they're talking about, except that Essie has picked up on this and is definitely understanding what's going on there. I think I can't quite tell if it's whether Ginny is just not as good at emotional interpretation as we're led to believe, or if it's that she's distracted by being so satisfied with the work and her current status, or whether she's just feeling secure in her interactions with Bill to the point where she's not paying attention. But normally you would just think that Ginny is so wonderful and so perfect in this show that she would instantly realize, hey, maybe it's a bad idea to flirt with my boss in front of his mother.
Well, and I think, in a sense, that's almost, obviously, that's where a lot of the fun lies for her, because, here is Essie, who is not a stupid woman, but who maybe Virginia likes to believe is more naive than she thought, and so, they get to have this fun little game, and they have their call and response, and blah, 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 but at the same time, I guess I would characterize it as a type of security and a stability that she feels there, because obviously, you don't allow yourself to have that kind of casual, unguarded interaction unless you just don't believe there's any consequences to be had from it.
She's just blinded by the whole situation.
Yeah, I think she feels like the research lab is her place, and here she is with Bill, who is championing ahead with his study, and they're undertaking the research in private, and she is very valuable, both for her contributions and for, her own research, and so I think she doesn't even give it a second thought.
I think Ginny particularly relishes her role as an interpreter and a go-between in the worlds of medicine and lay people. And there's a lot of other layers, dualities and sides to her roles outside of the study in other worlds, as she talked about in the last episode. When she is in the classroom, the other guys treat her like shit. They're rude to her right to her face. When it comes to being around the secretaries, they're not outright hostile to her, but they are passive-aggressive, just not willing enough. They're not enthusiastically welcoming her to the table, so she moves on. And this is the one place where she feels secure in her status, so I won't say that she oversteps the boundaries, because she's been led to believe that her position is secure.
Well, and if you overlook the fact that she and Bill are undertaking the research together and having sex together, there's no impropriety in anything that she says at the dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Essie is not offended by the conversation. Essie is willing to learn. Obviously, Bill doesn't want his mom there, but that's a totally separate thing, and I think Ginny takes some small pleasure in, like you said, being the go-between between Bill and his surliness and his mother and her cheerfulness.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing that I thought was kind of awkward, unfortunately, that could have been really, really well done was when she warns him about the black olives. I thought that whole little sequence, I don't know if it was bad writing or if it was just, it stuck out in an awkward, unpleasant way.
I think some of that might have been line delivery, too, because...
Did that stand out to you? Am I alone here? Was that just me?
No, because the first time I watched this episode, the way that Lizzie Kaplan says black olives, it's so rushed and it's so low, you almost don't quite catch it. And so the first time I watched this episode, I didn't know that she said black olives until they really started talking about it. So it was one of those things. I don't think there's ever a
graceful, maybe there's not a graceful way to put it in there.
Yeah, there's not really a graceful or indirect way to say, hey buddy, there's black olives in your food, don't ask me how I know that. But obviously you want to include little moments like that to show how well they know each other, so I don't necessarily begrudge it being there, but you're right, it was a little bit awkward.
Because it's followed up by what should be an awkward moment, but what turns out, I think, to be a really graceful and lovely moment when she gets up and completely mortifies him by reading his performance evaluation of her out loud.
Right.
Because it turns out that he's very kind and generous in writing, indirect thoughts that she's really not supposed to see, or that maybe if he had intended for her to see it, it would have been, oh, here's a manila envelope with your performance evaluation, you go ahead and take this, and, now we'll both part ways and go home for the night, and, you can process that by yourself. It was not meant to go like this. And it's meant to be very embarrassing for them, but mostly it just comes off as very sweet and lovely and kind of scary with Essie sitting there.
Yeah, obviously if Essie wasn't suspicious before, that's going to get her hackles up because he's never been that effusive about anything in his entire life.
This is true. One thing that I did write down in my notes was, did performance reviews even exist in the 50s?
I'm sure they did at some institutions. University, it makes sense that they would have them because, obviously, like, that even now it's still a system that rests on paper evaluations and performance reviews and stacked measurements of, capability and likability and blah, 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 leading to tenure applications.
Yeah, I suppose so.
So I really didn't give that a passing thought, but, maybe at other non-academic environments, they weren't a big deal at all.
Ultimately, Ginny's big flub of reading the performance evaluation out loud only serves to make her whole situation, the fact that she kind of, overstep just is not the word that I want. She overreaches herself, but not to criticize her, because it's understandable that she would do that. I think it causes her to go even further, and it has implications later in the episode when she agrees to be filmed. Like, she's just caught up in this love fest, essentially. She's at the top of the game here.
Well, and I think at that point she almost wants to prove that this thing that she read in jest, but he wrote as a legitimate reflection of her work, she wants it to be true. She wants to prove that it's even truer now, even after she made fun of him. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Do we want to talk about them in the porn shop?
Let's do it.
It's a great sentence to get to say. Bill and Ginny walk into a porn shop.
It's the beginning of the best joke ever.
I think the flirtation continues, and Ginny tends to respond to him with compliments and these little jokes in a way. But Bill's reaction or response, I guess, is to be very protective and to create like a bubble around them. Does that make sense?
No, I understand that, because obviously, she kind of likes to bait him a little bit and be playful and be funny, and then he just likes to roll his eyes and sort of sigh but secretly enjoy it, and that's the bubble that he just wants to have forever.
Yeah.
That is the sweet spot of their existence.
Yeah, that's going to be trouble when they get any measure of fame, because Jenny is going to be the social one, and he is going to be the one saying, "No, wait a minute, this is us. This is just our thing. Like, why are you talking to other people? Why are you going and hanging out with other people for hours on end? It's already beginning.
How dare you have interests other than me?
How dare you? You're my mother, wife, confidant, lover, combination, everything, and that should be all." Let's talk about Libby for a little bit.
Okay.
Because I feel like we need to go back and fill that in. When she, and I'm not even that interested in her telling Essie that there's kind of three major things that tie themselves together in this one, and I just feel like we're doing this all out of order. This is going to drive me a little crazy. We sort of have a return to the very thin, negligible thread throughout this season that Libby is very religious, because she doesn't want to speak the words out loud to either Essie or Bill when she finally tells him later in the episode. And
right.
She starts to see things that happen outside of her immediate sphere. Like, she starts to see things like the death of the bird as being the wrath of God. She's very superstitious and paranoid.
Obviously, she's having to watch for the signs of pregnancy and keep them hidden from Bill, but at the same time, I think that's only heightened her anxiety to watch for all the possible negative signs, She started policing one thing and then it just went overboard.
Yeah, I could not quite decide what... She doesn't come right out and say it. She says the bird's death is her fault, but why is it her fault? Like, what exactly is this terrible thing that she's done? Is it that she lied to Bill? Or is it that she chose to be selfish in saving herself from dying internally? Because I can't really see Libby as thinking of herself as acting very selfishly. Like, I can see her thinking that something would be selfish, but not truly being selfish. I can see her feeling awful for negatively impacting someone else's life. Like, she just strikes me as the type of character who would be that degree of selfless.
Yeah, I wouldn't see her characterizing the desperate want for a child as selfish, especially given her background and, what she said about how she wants to form her life and have a family. But I think she does recognize that there is something wrong with the idea of having to ask forgiveness rather than permission.
Mm-hmm.
Because, obviously not only is she someone who has lied to her husband, but she's also the type of woman who was raised with the expectation that, you ask your husband's permission for everything. You when you get married, you bond your lives to each other and you give of yourself to be, this man's wife and not man's husband. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
I'm getting it all wrong at the end, but it's like she, by willingly giving up some of her own agency, she thought that would make her happy, and then she does something completely for herself. I think she has Bill's best interest in mind, obviously, because she wants them to be bound together by this child, which will love them both, and which she thinks he will love more than he loves her, more than he loves anyone. But she also, feels terrible that it came about from lying to him and not seducing him, but, trying to concoct a believable cover story for that.
But I almost wondered that maybe she felt a little bit of guilt over the child itself being conceived not out of this great romantic love with, a fireplace in the background and all this, but through the cold light of science. I think that's a continuing idea for her.
Well, I don't know, because, at the same time, yes, obviously she would have preferred it to happen the natural way without hours on her back and all of these terrible invasive procedures. But, when she learned she's pregnant the first time, and even last episode, learning again, she does treat it as a kind of miracle. So it's like that modern idea of miracles and God working through science, but at the same time, she's still got that very old-fashioned view. These are the signs from God. These are bad omens. These are, the reasons why children are necessary and why, God created these urges for sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Bill talking to Libby towards the end. When he first walked into the room and she's watching TV, and he'd been sent there by Essie, essentially, from the scene previously, what did you think of the way he approached her in this? Because the way Essie talks to him, well, maybe we should...
I honestly I feel like we're doing this. We're doing fine.
Okay, this is going to drive me nuts. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about Essie talking to Bill first, since that leads into it.
Okay.
I thought that this is like the absolute lowest point for Essie, because the worst thing she ever did is not, it is that she didn't speak up, but it's also that she comes charging in with the worst thing she ever did. And she acts like this is this big absolution, and that it's going to, she's going to have the opportunity to impart wisdom onto him, and this is her apology for all these years of abuse, and then she makes it all about her. Whatever she has to say to him is never going to be enough, because she immediately follows it up with, and you are just like your father, here you are having an affair with your secretary, and everyone can see it, and, what do you think this is going to do to your family?
Well, and I think it's interesting the way that she does this, because, like you said, at first you think it's going to be about absolution and acknowledging, truth, but it takes a sharp dovetail, as so many of her stories often do, into let me ruin another thing from your childhood for you there.
Yeah, let me recall the fact that, your father was a horrible person, even though you've probably spent the last 20 years trying to choke down all your memories of this and repress everything and forget about it.
Well, and not even that. It was almost, obviously, the abuse has left powerful marks on both of them, but the fact that she can even ruin some of the tiniest things that would have happened to him that would have been decent, like, this nice lady at his father's work giving him saltwater taffy, and turn that into, oh yeah, this lady that your father was banging all the time.
Yeah, I can see, because he obviously remembered the woman, and that was probably, some small, that could have been, not obviously, it could have been some small sense of reprieve.
Right, so it's, not only is it, let me just come in and talk to you about all the big, terrible things that we both know happened, but let me
drop a bomb on you.
Yeah, just continued truth bombs that you don't want and don't need, but I will tell you anyway.
Yeah, so then she tells him that he needs to go and talk to Libby, and this is, the segue from Essie saying, look, I know there's something going on between you two, now you need to go talk to your wife. Did you see Bill his mindset as being, oh fuck, Libby knows what's going on, or she suspects, or something, because he very carefully hedges his bets there.
Yeah, that weird little "you tell me."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, obviously he does come in thinking that maybe Libby has some suspicion. I also think that he comes in maybe wondering if he's going to have to give Libby another pep talk about being depressed over her miscarriage.
Yeah, that's possible.
Because it sort of seemed like he was gearing himself up to say something along the lines of, "We can't have any babies, but cheer up, kid, it's going to be fine."
Did you think that they reached any kind of understand? I don't have an answer to this. You know, I still think it's kind of ambiguous. Any understanding about whether Libby knows that it's Bill who's infertile rather than her? Because she very, you know, she was being broad, like really gesturing outward sarcastically, and I think that was a huge neon sign over her head that was, you know, I know it's you and not me, but again, everything's couched in these circuitous terms, so you never quite really get a definitive sense of whether he understood that.
Oh, I think he understood that. At least for my impression, just the way that he was watching her as she was talking about that, you know I'm the one with the problem. Obviously, it's my fault. And just, you could tell he was almost waiting for it to go from that passive-aggressive twist to, you know, the accusation or just the words in the air. And then when it didn't, he kind of sidestepped that entirely, and they just went to the pretending to forget that this ever happened.
And Libby approaches the purpose, I guess, the ultimate point of sex, the way that Ginny kind of approaches the involuntary reactions. And I think they both describe these things in totally different terms. Ginny approaches it as these very detached, you know, these are involuntary emotions. I'm not scratching you because I'm marking you or doing anything purposely. This is all purely detached, and I'm detaching myself from, you know, and I'm excusing myself and not taking any responsibility for this. And at the same time, Libby's saying that she's not even willing to give the lab study or an orgasm itself any value independent of her desperate, overarching, just, I'd say, almost clutching need for a family. And I think both of them approach it from too extreme of viewpoints in this episode. Like, I think they're both off.
Well, and obviously it's so colored by their personal experiences that there's no way to really separate, I would say, objective criticism. You know, obviously X is the higher purpose of sex. It's not Y or Z, but obviously because Libby, you know, she has experienced sex as something very clinical and painful and fraught with anxiety because, you know, the point of sex for her is to try and get a kid on her, and she hasn't been able to do that. And not only that, she hasn't been able to feel close to Bill in the way that married people should be able to. And so I think that's obviously colored her view as seeing sex as meant only for children.
I think it's interesting. You say that Libby has experienced sex as something so clinical, and yet what she truly wants out of it is totally the opposite. And that makes sense to some degree, but then Ginny also does the same thing. She experiences sex as this big, passionate romp. She always seems to get something great out of it. And yet she kind of really just wants to be detached from it. Like, she's had her heart broken, she's been divorced and judged for that, and I think she's very much forcibly detaching herself from it and trying to distance herself in a way that doesn't really make good sense. It's interesting how they're different sides of the same coin.
No, I agree, especially because Ginny is purposefully trying to put distance between, you know, herself and sex, because obviously so many mitigating feelings and thoughts, especially with regard to Bill. And then here you have Libby, who is sort of reaching for that other side, for that passion and that intimacy, and just can't grab it.
Well, let's take a little break from this. You want to talk about Ginny's conversation with Lillian?
Let's do it.
I know you do, because you're Lillian's #1 fan.
I am. I have a little banner. So
you have your little collegiate flag that you wave that says Lillian on the side in big letters.
Lillian, she's our man. She can do it great.
Good for her.
I really like, obviously, their conversation in the cafeteria for many reasons, but I think probably I like it the most because it shows how they have so much common ground. Because obviously, you know, we've been seeing them as characters that are diametrically opposed. You have Ginny, who once fit in with the secretaries and once was a bright, good-looking girl who attracted, you know, attention and was positive and fun and could get some things done. And then here you have Lillian on the other end, who never really seemed to fit in at all. She's very masculine. She carries herself very strictly. She's a stern teacher. She's a doctor. And so she never experienced that companionship to begin with. But here at this little table of weirdos, they realize that they are both isolated. They have, you know, are very committed to their work. And as Lillian says, the work is what endures. But Ginny, you know, can tell it has reservations with the idea of spending the rest of her life eating alone, while Lillian is just solely, singularly, I guess, not resigned to it, but I'm not quite sure what the word I'm looking for there is.
No, I see what you're saying. And from what we've seen of the season 2 preview pictures, there is at least some point in their future when Ginny is going to take on Lillian as a role model, a very direct one, dressing like her, doing her hair exactly like her. And I think this is another situation that we could compare to Mad Men, and Virginia needing to be more like Peggy and not just imitate people like, and this is a complete opposite example, but not imitate people like Joan, but, you know, take Bobby Barrett's advice and go her own way and forge her own system of, you know, being herself and being a woman, but getting the job done.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, Ginny is still having trouble navigating that landscape between this person that I used to be, who can joke with all the classmates and fit in with the secretaries and has that ability to trade on her charm, essentially, in order to sacrifice that and be the one who proves herself through her work and through her ambition. And obviously, you know, she's trying to adjust to that. She's trying to go after that, and finding that a lot of other aspects are getting in the way.
Yeah, and I think she would, I honestly think that the fundamental difference between her and Lillian is that Lillian probably had the capacity to sacrifice those things and, you know, slay them at the altar of medicine in the first place, whereas I don't think Ginny, I think she's always going to be that go-between. I don't think she's ever going to be fully committed to one side, layman, or the other side, medicine. Like, she's going to force into existence a middle ground.
Yeah, I definitely agree. She wants there to be some sort of stepping stone and not just, you know, one strict opposite of the other.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk about Vivian and Ethan quickly?
Yeah, sure. Just looking over my notes, when did you think that Vivian and Ethan were completely over as far as this episode goes?
When he was so casual in talking to the Reverend, you know, he was just like, I'm okay with whatever. Like, I was like, you do not have the level of commitment to keep up this charade. Like, you can't even pretend to be interested at this point. You're just waiting for an exit sign.
Well, and that's what was cracking me up about him in the wedding cake shop. I was waiting for that baker to just poison his cake with X-Lax because, you know, here he is just sort of like, whatever, cake is cake. Let's get one of these and move along already.
Yeah, exactly. It did strike me that Vivian is, in the same way as Austin, she's kind of a tourist, or I guess a go-and-see kind of gal. She doesn't like being perceived as stupid. Like, she didn't pick up on the fact that Ethan is Jewish, or that maybe he's, you know, different than other men. So she does... Yeah, she does her... He's clipped. She really does her best to go out and try something or get involved. And usually it's disastrous. Like losing her virginity, she's willing to, you know, take her top off and get whiskey poured on her breast. She's willing to just hop into bed with Ethan. Like, she's adventurous, but it never works out the way she thinks it's going to.
Well, and she likes to pretend to be worldly. I always got the sense from her that she was just this character who, you know, kind of dreamed of adventure, and I have this headcanon of her as kind of an Anne Shirley type who just has all these, obviously not as charming and sweet and naive as Anne Shirley, but, you know, some of those same qualities where she just spins all these fantasies and imaginings about how her life is going to go and, you know, how amazing she's going to be once she gets to be this age or, you know, does this thing. And like you said, none of them turn out the way that she hopes that they would. And not only that, even her attempts to learn more about the things that she doesn't know just go terribly.
This is the last time we see Vivian this season, and I know she's been in the trailer for season 2. And I wonder how this is going to affect her, like this final blow. Because it's just been racking up. Like, she's just had rejection after rejection. It's just been a bad year for Vivian. And I have the feeling that she's gonna be bitter and nasty in the season 2 episode.
Yeah, judging from the previews, it's going to be a doozy.
Yeah.
So.
And let's see. So, like we said, Ethan attempts to convert in basically the most passive way ever.
Basically, if you drag me up to the head of the church, I will say the words, I guess.
I'll do whatever you say. I mean, they're just words. It doesn't really mean anything. And then when they get into their argument later, she's willing to be flexible and adapt. Like, she's willing to give up her dream of having a church wedding. She starts talking about, well, we can just go down to the courthouse. You know, I'll do whatever it takes. And he's already constructed this big, I'm going to go out and find my purpose in life, and I'm finally going to forge my own path and take control of my destiny, and this is going to be great. Whereas really he's honestly just using it as an excuse. It's an excuse to get away with breaking off the whole thing, which is so shitty of him.
Well, and what's interesting to me about that from both of their perspectives, you know, because Vivian, the sort of compromises that she's proposing, I feel like almost mark, I would say, marriages that happen, you know, 10, 15 years down the road, like late 60s, early 70s. Here you have, you know, a lot of interracial couples getting married, a lot of sort of culture clash in the way that you wouldn't have seen as often in the late 50s. You know, so Vivian talking about how, well, you know, you'll be Jewish and I won't be, and we'll figure out how to raise the kids. You know, I thought that was very interesting and sort of telling of the generational differences there.
Maybe there's hope for Vivian.
I hope so. I do. You know, who knows? Maybe she'll leave St. Louis and go study abroad and find somebody over there. It was interesting to me, you know, even though, like you said, Ethan's not really, he's conveniently Jewish when he needs to be.
Yeah.
It was interesting that he started talking about his father, because I think that was really the one sort of genuine nugget in all of his carefully constructed argument, was that, you know, his father was such a pious Jew, and really sort of reflecting on, you know, his father as a practicing Jewish person of faith, and especially considering the timeline, because, you know, not only is this the late 50s, here we have Israel, which was just established as a state in 1948, and the Holocaust was only 12 years prior to this. You know, I think obviously that would have weighed heavily upon any Jewish person of faith at that time. And so it seemed to me like Ethan was really having sincere thoughts in that area about how pious his father was, and how much he believed in his religion. And I wouldn't say like comparing himself or whatever, but I thought that was a very poignant moment.
Well, and it makes, I think it kind of casts Ethan in a doubly bad light, that he was clearly alive and a sentient human being at the time of the Holocaust, one presumes, and his parents, or at least his father, was a devout Jew, and yet he takes such a cavalier attitude about the whole thing until it's suddenly convenient for him. Like, it just makes it even worse.
Yeah, because here he is, you know, running around disobeying his parents whenever he feels like it so he can eat some bacon, and it does put him in a terrible light.
Ethan's a shit pot.
Yeah, what's new?
Okay, so we can end on the breakup of Bill and Virginia, their little utopia bubble that they've created. Bill has to break the illusion.
You gotta break the bubble.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask what you thought the reason was for Bill giving her the money. Because obviously, you know, it in so many capacities, it's meant to be so many things. You know, it's Bill's. I saw it almost as him trying to absolve himself of guilt for the situation he has created with Jenny, which has, as Essie put it, completely wrecked his family life. You know, it was meant to drive a wedge between them, but did you think it was meant to drive her completely away.
Someone put it really, really well. I read one of the comments somewhere, I don't remember where, but that Bill he sort of treats it as the thing to be done. Like, he doesn't really believe it, obviously. It's not a genuine rejection. I think it's the go-to, like, it's one step beneath the separation that firing her would be. It's just enough of an emotional break, but he's not taking away her job, and he's not really putting her in a position where she feels required to quit. Like, it's just enough manipulation to separate them, like to immediately separate them. But I think his expression throughout their whole conversation is he really wishes that she'd pick up on the fact that this isn't really what he means. And she does momentarily, but he just keeps going, and it's the reality that she's forced to accept, unfortunately.
Well, I think obviously she does have that moment of, well, you don't mean this isn't sincere. And then I think she sort of files that away under Bill being crazy robot who no one understands.
Yeah.
For mysterious reasons. Like you said, that flicker's there, and then just as quickly it's gone.
And it's amazing to me how she doesn't pick up on his shift in mood between the fact that they were so overtly flirting with each other before and after his, and not that she would have known that Essie showed up, but after Essie shows up, like, even when she's excitedly telling him that she's willing to be filmed, he doesn't really respond to her in the same way. It's not, she's so involved off in her own stuff that she doesn't pick up on any of the signals. And just one episode prior, she'd been telling Jane, well, your purpose and the whole point of the job is for you to pick up on Bill's subtle vibrations, like a seismograph. And here she doesn't do that at all. She's not picking up on it.
Well, and it's almost like she believes they've gotten so close that she doesn't have to do that kind of scrutiny anymore.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
It obviously, she feels safe enough, secure enough to say, oh, well, I'll watch for black olives, but obviously I don't have to, spend an afternoon judging the way his hand shakes when he pours coffee in order to figure out his mood.
Yeah. I think what hurts Ginny the most, she was already feeling pretty terrible with him paying her like a prostitute, but then what really pushes it into outright mean territory is the return to the language, my study, not our study.
Yeah, that's the point, I think, when it really just kills her.
And I think that was the one thing that, like, that was the trump card. Like, she could have forgiven him up to that point.
And I think, too, to a certain extent, you could hedge and rationalize and try and suss out the meaning behind the money because, obviously he's constructed this little attempted logical argument, well, Jane's not doing the filming anymore, so this is the money that she gave back to us, and then I added up all these times we were in the study together, and blah, blah, blah. I think if it had only been about that fake little house of cards, she could have come in and, had a couple days and thought about it and then come back just with constant rebuttals. But the fact that, like you said, it goes back to my study, not our study, just a passive participant in this rather than someone who is shaping the dynamics of science and anatomy and, society. I think that's what really kills her.
And then Bill gets to relive the worst thing that he's ever done because now he has reel-to-reel footage of Ginny in the last moments before he completely wrecked any sense of trust she had in him.
That was interesting, too, because not only was he just completely mesmerized in a bad way by the film, but even during the filming, it was like a starving man, like a man preparing to starve because, he can't tear his eyes away. He can't stop watching her. It's just like he's got to soak up all of this last experience, lest he never have it again.
Yeah, he is kind of bracing himself for it, like, yeah, trying to take it all in before it has to go away. And there's, of course, there's all these questions about, well, what did he do to get that film developed? Did he go back to the same place and the guy knew who she was and would recognize her face? And how did that all play out? There's another weird question we never get the answer to.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. I just assumed it was the same place, so...
But yeah, that whole him sitting there watching starts out, it's this almost prideful, like, look at me, I'm getting to watch this kind of thing, and you can, the way the light plays over his face. there's a subtle transition, and by the end of it, he just looks absolutely horrified with himself.
Oh yeah, I mean, it very quickly flips from something triumphant and, another stolen moment captured on film to shit.
The fuck did I do? Oh god, I fucked it
Yeah.
up. The last thing is Bill talking to the janitor. And you said in your notes that you weren't sure whether we're meant to think that he can see Ginny crying in her car. I don't know.
I was just wondering, because he's staring out the window, and by all means, it could just be his thinking window, but, the way it cuts between him standing there talking to the janitor and then Ginny just sobbing in her car uncontrollably, that made me wonder on rewatch.
Yeah, I in a perfect world, I would like to think so. Actually, that would be some excellent drama.
Well, and it's probably just him staring at some plant in the courtyard, so...
I think previous episodes have shown that his view is actually of a brick wall, like the building next door, and it probably looks down into an alley, where the trash carts go or something, so it looks good, him standing there brooding in front of the window, but in reality, I bet his view is probably terrible.
Although that would work with the motif of this episode, so you never know.
So, yeah. So, what harm did you think that Bill was talking about specifically? Because this is another instance where it's kind of... I don't think Bill would be have so much self-acuity as to say, oh, yes, the great harm that I have perpetuated is that I have, ruined my relationship with my loving wife, and I have pushed away all my chances at a loving family, and I have done wrong by someone who is supposed to trust me. Like, I think he really is talking about Ginny, but it's interesting to me, and it's a matter of consequence, he's not going to tell a janitor all his problems, that he is so ambiguous. Like, maybe it's possible, I think, that he could mean in a very broad, general sense, do no harm, and yet that's all he does, is stomp around doing harm to other people.
Well, and I took it in a very general way. It's not, here is the harm that I have wrought upon all these people, but it was... To me, it seemed more like a manifestation of self-loathing. Bill, when speaking with the janitor, he just kind of says, not good, I'm afraid. Really is the general feeling of his whole, I would say, response to most of the things that are happening in his life. He's obviously failing at something. Maybe he has too much of an ego to admit the specific failures, but generally it can be summed up as not good.
Not good, Bob.
Yeah, not great. I don't think I have anything else in my notes except for Ginny and the study group, which...
Bunch of shit pots, that's all that needs to be said.
Yeah, young baby-faced classmates being shitheads, so...
Thank goodness that they never come back.
Yeah, thank God. I couldn't stand any more of that whining.
Alright, well, if that's all we've got to say, then that's all we've got to say, and we'll be back hopefully soon, I think, since the Season 2 premiere is coming up with another episode, but... For now, this has been Masters of Podcasting.
We'll see you later.
Bye.